Okay, hello everyone.
Hi.
Hello,
Hello.
Harrison. Hello, Pippa.
Hello.
So, for anybody, and I'm going to try and center this a bit better. This is really bad, but okay, this way. For anyone watching live, you are watching live with Ask the Agent as advertised for the last couple of days. We've put this very unique event together for tenants. As you know, Harrison, Pippa, and myself run the help and advice group on Facebook, where many of you have come and posted your questions. We wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to us live. We've all given up a little bit of time for you today. I think we're all working from home today. So I, for one, have crazy cats, so just ignore them if you see them flying around in the background. Okay, but first of all, before we get started, we're just going to show you a little intro to what we are all about today. Okay, lovely, short and sweet. So, if anybody wants to come and ask us a question, please do post it as a comment. Once you've done so, we'll be able to bring it up on screen, just like this one, for example. Just so we know you've posted it, we can say hello to you and we can try our best to answer your questions. If there's anything we can't answer immediately, feel free to private message any one of us. We will get back to you, I promise, or post your question in our group. So, Pippa, we'll start with you. You said earlier on you wanted to talk about scammers in the private rented sector and how that's affecting tenants. So please, stage is all yours.
Thank you. So scammers and scamming is quite a big one that I see come up. I'm in a lot of tenant and landlord groups, a lot of advice groups. We as agents tend to put ourselves out there because we know the legislation and we want to help protect you from being victims of stuff like this. And actually recently, it was a couple of days ago, a young lady in a local Southend in Essex where I'm based group posted a warning to other users about a scammer who had listed a property for rent on Facebook. So Facebook Marketplace, obviously great place now to look for property and to advertise property. But as with any advertising method, you really need to just do your due diligence. This particular landlord wasn't actually the landlord of the property, had asked the young lady for a deposit, said that he was overseas and she couldn't see the inside of the property but could go around and look in the window. Something flagged for her that didn't seem right, and she did a bit more digging into it, and it turns out that he was a scammer, didn't own the property, it was listed with another agent. So my advice to people in this situation, if there's anything that doesn't seem right, or even if everything does seem right, just make sure that you cover yourself. Ask the landlord, if it's a private landlord and not through an agency, ask them for proof of ownership. Ask them for a copy of the deed showing their name. Ask them for a photographic ID showing their name. Ask them for proof of address. A private, legitimate landlord will have no problem in providing you with that information. A scammer will disappear. Never, ever, ever part with money before you've had an internal viewing of the property and you've got something in writing to show that you're going to get a receipt for that money that you've parted with. So never part with your hard-earned cash without checking all the boxes. If you're ever in doubt, if something doesn't look right, you're absolutely welcome to just send me a message and I will speak to the landlord on your behalf. I'll check the documents. Most agents would have no issue with doing that for you as a tenant. It takes me 10 minutes and it protects you from potentially losing thousands. So just watch your backs. It's a bit of a snake pit. Facebook can be great and it can also be full of scammers. So just be careful.
And Pippa, what do you think makes it so easy now for scammers to be able to carry this out? And what do you think are the signs, apart from what you've already covered, are there any other signs that tenants should be looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, one of them, a key one, is check the person's profile. If they've got a recently set up profile or a profile with not many friends, not many photographs, that should be a red flag straight away. It's somebody that's come on just to list a property. Unfortunately, I don't know about you guys, but certainly here in Essex, the tenant demand is huge and the property supply is very low. For tenants on housing benefit, particularly, the supply is even smaller, and people get desperate, and they're more willing to believe that there are properties available, and so they can be taken in by these scammers who are preying on people's desperation. So my other word of advice is just, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. If you're absolutely desperate for a property, get yourself registered with every agent in your area, and make sure that you're pre-qualified and ready to go. You've got your deposit funds ready, and as soon as a property comes up, you can put yourself straight forward and get in the door. Speaking to private landlords directly can be great, but you just need to do your due diligence and just triple check everything, and just don't part with a penny if it doesn't seem right.
Thank you, Pippa. Which kind of brings me on Harrison. I don't know if you've noticed, Harrison and Pippa, but a lot of people, when they're asking for properties, they will put direct landlords only or private landlords only, no agents. Why do you think that is now?
I think it's for two reasons, really. First reason is, unfortunately, when you go through an agent, as an agent, we'll do various different referencing, and I mean, we do very in-depth referencing because of the climate at the moment. So we'll make sure that A, they can afford the property, and B, they have a good renting or credit history. So I think those tenants that are asking for direct landlords might be because they have quite a poor renting or credit history. So they know they're not going to pass the check. So they want to go direct to the landlord because some landlords just aren't able or willing to do a credit check. So I think that's the first reason. And then I think the second reason tenants want to go direct to landlords is because some just aren't aware that there are no fees anymore. They're not aware of the Tenant Fee Act that came into place last year now. So they think there are registration fees, there are referencing fees, and that sort of stuff. So they just simply don't want to pay that. And quite frankly, it's quite understandable. You know, why would you want to pay 180 quid just to put an application in for a property that you might fail on? So I think it's a mixture of those two reasons, really. And so, yeah, so I think educating the tenant and putting it out there that, you know, the Tenant Fee Act has come into place and we as agents can't, or we can charge as such, is a holding deposit. And that's not a fee. That's very often confused. We get emails all the time when we take a holding deposit from tenants saying, I've paid the holding fee. And they always respond saying, it's not a fee, it's a deposit. You can, you know. So I think they're the two main reasons why tenants want to go direct to the landlords, and it can leave them in a situation exactly what Pippa's just explained, really. So yeah, really do kind of do your due diligence on the landlord that you're speaking to.
Yeah.
And Pippa, what are your thoughts on the Tenant Fees Act 2019?
Yeah, Harrison's actually just reminded me of a recent conversation that I had with a tenant when I was doing a viewing, because coming back to the Tenant Fees Act, a lot of tenants are not necessarily aware of the caps on deposits now. So many tenants will be aware that there's generally a 5-week cap on the deposit amount. Is up to 6 weeks on properties. I think it's £100,000 a year, isn't it? The rent. None of the properties that I rent would be eligible for the 6-week cap. So generally it's a 5-week cap on the deposit that can be taken at the start of the tenancy. And particularly when it comes to pet owners, I have seen examples of private landlords. I haven't seen any examples of agencies doing it. Thankfully, touch wood, all the agencies are abreast of the recent legislation. But the private landlord had told this young couple that they could have their dog, but he would require a double deposit.
Oh,
so
wow.
be aware as tenants. I mean, tenants aren't generally always aware that that's illegal. He cannot take a double deposit from you. It's in breach of the Tenant Fees Act. So again, if you're not sure on anything, just check, just phone an agent and say, does this landlord wants £3,000 deposit, does that seem right to you? And check it out. Especially pet owners, again, the same as people on housing benefit, the pool becomes smaller, and so you're sometimes vulnerable to people taking advantage of that.
Lovely. And Harrison, we've kind of appointed you to talk about maintenance issues. So would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue for a tenant that I see, both on forums and even dealing with our own tenants, is maintenance issues. So, you know, as a tenant, you want to live in a property that's well maintained, comfortable to live in, and us as agents also want that for tenants. Now, what I'm seeing often, particularly on Facebook groups and advice groups, is when a tenant has an issue, a repair issue, and they're asking for advice, what can I do? I often see the advice come from generally other tenants, I've got to say, stop paying your rent. Now, I've got to say in big capital bold letters with an exclamation mark behind it at the end of it, don't stop paying your rent. And whilst you may feel that you're really annoyed that this maintenance issue isn't being sorted, by stop paying rent, it puts you as a tenant in such a terrible situation, because we had a conversation before, and Stephen raised a very good point that if you keep mentioning the maintenance issues to your landlord and nothing's being done about it, and then the landlord issues you a notice under Section 21, which is essentially a no fault eviction, that's what it's designed for, then a judge may rule that Section 21 isn't valid for various reasons, but more particularly because it's in retaliation to you requesting for your property to be fixed. So you might not actually get evicted because of that. So what my advice would be is continue to pay the rent, continue to be a good tenant, continue to act in a tenant-like manner, and you've satisfied then the terms that you agreed to in the tenancy and are legally obliged to. And then the onus is then on the landlord to make sure that these issues are resolved and in a timely manner. Now, I think what can we do when we're in a situation where you're continuing to pay your rent and they're still not getting fixed? Well, there's various things you can go, and I think it might be a slightly separate topic, but the first thing you can do is go to the local housing standards team at the council. They're usually contactable by email, particularly now, and they're usually probably one of the only departments in the council that actually answer the phone quite quickly. I've got to say, so there is help there for you. You can get advice from other housing organisations, but the council will be your first step. And what they can do is then write to the landlord or the agent, attend the property, and if it is a serious issue, they will put down enforcement notice on the landlord and say, you have to get this fixed, or you're going to have a big stinking great big fine, or even prosecution, depending on the severity of the issue. And they will really get the process moving quite forward. And no landlord is unafraid of the council or agent, so they will get the work done. I think the only situation, as an exception to the rule, and it is widely publicised by Shelter, etc., of stopping paying rent, is very far down the line. So there is guidance by Shelter that you should, if there is a maintenance issue, then you should get quotes and bill the landlord and take it out the rent. Now, that process isn't a quick process. It's quite lengthy. You have to constantly inform the landlord of the works that need doing. If you get no response, get 3 quotes in writing, send to the landlord, give them a period of time to respond. And then if still nothing's happened down the line, then pay for the works and deduct it from the rent. Only in that situation would not paying the rent be acceptable. So please, as tenants, I know it can be frustrating if you have a landlord that's not doing anything, but don't immediately stop paying your rent. Continue to make the payments and think and speak to the council.
And Harrison, where are we at if you have to stop paying your rent for any reason? And as you say, it's obviously not a good idea. But if our tenants reach the stages where they feel they have to stop paying the rent, what should they do with the money?
I think if you have to stop paying your rent to pay for the repairs, it should be for that primary reason, is to pay for the repairs. And you'd follow that process of obtaining the quotes and sending it to the landlord, using those funds to pay for those repairs. And then if there's any surplus funds left over, then that should go then to the landlord. So you haven't held the money back to go down to the local nightclub and have a few sherries. You've used that for the sole purpose of fixing the property, which you've been hounding the landlord to do. So Certainly don't hold it back as ransom, because that won't get you anywhere. It won't get anybody anywhere. And, you know, from a human point of view, it will break down the communications and the relationship with your landlord. And if you actually like the property and you've lived there for a while, do you want to move? Do you want to lose your home? Because eventually that might happen. So, you know, let's be human. We're all human. Just have a chat with your landlord right from the beginning. And if you do have to go to that extreme of using that rental money to pay for repairs, then, you know, still try and maintain a good relationship with your landlord.
Thank you, Harrison. And I'd like to point out that if you're dealing with an estate agent or a lettings agent, and they're not being very helpful, or they just kind of, it's natural for letting agents to want inquiries to go through themselves so they can keep track of all the issues. But if they're not being helpful, they do, you know, upon demand, have to give you the name and address of your landlord as well.
Yeah, I think there's is it section 46 or section 47 of the Landlord and Tenant Act 1987? I think it's 46 or 47. I always get mixed up. But yeah, if you put in a formal request to the agent for, I mean, the landlord's name should and must be on the tenancy agreement anyway. The service address can be the agent, but yeah, if you make a request under that statute to the agent for the name and address of your landlord, they must give it to you, and they have to give it to you in a timely manner. And I think it's reasonable to say a week is probably sufficient time. They don't have to give you the phone number and the email address of the landlord, though, so don't get irritated if they don't do that, because there's nothing to say they have to, and some tenants think they have to, but they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And Pippa, you had something on pets, didn't you?
Yeah. For me, pets is a bit of a hot topic at the moment. I know you guys saw my recent blog post about the proposed bill for forcing, maybe not the right word, but making landlords accept pets in private rented property. And I made the mistake of having an opinion on this, which put me in a bit of hot water on Facebook, but that's social media for you. Personally, I am a pet owner. I've got a dog. I've got 2 cats. Absolutely love pets. In my own private rentals, I allow pets. I think that tenants with pets stay longer. I think that tenants with pets generally will make really good tenants, because the pool for them of available properties is smaller, so they want to stay. They want to look after that property. But I realise that it's really difficult sometimes, if you're looking to move with a pet, to find a property that will accept you. So I just wanted to talk about Let's with Pets. As Bailey White Lettings Management, I am a member of Let's with Pets. Have a look online. This is the kind of the material that you'll get sent out. They've got a really good website. It's supported by the Dogs Trust. And I think that there's a list on Let's with Pets website of agents. You can find them by area that work with them. So generally those agents are going to be more likely to have landlords on their books that will consider pets. So you do have options. The other options for pet owners, if there's a property that you're already in, speak to your landlord. 100% have that chat with your landlord. Do not get a pet without telling your landlord and think that they won't find out, because if they do find out, you're in breach of your contract and you leave yourself liable for potential eviction. So just don't do it. Have the conversation. If you've been a good tenant, you've looked after the property, you've not got any rent arrears, most landlords are, landlords are people too. Most landlords will be open to at least having that conversation. So never just sneakily do it. If there's a property that you're looking at and you're a pet owner and it says no pets, again, try it. Try having the conversation, speak to the agent, speak to the landlord, explain the nature. I've worked with a landlord who said that he wouldn't have a pet in his property, met the pet. We had videos and photos of, it was a dog. We had videos and photos, then a meeting, and eventually the dog was allowed. So don't rule it out. If you've got a really well-behaved 10-year-old Jack Russell, maybe your landlord's put no pets because they don't want a Rottweiler, but maybe they'll allow your dog or your cat or your goldfish. Have the conversation. Don't rule it out, and try not to get disheartened. I know it's really hard, but as a pet owner, I feel for you. They're part of the family. There's always something that you can do.
And Pippa, what are your thoughts about landlords that will take pets, but want to increase the monthly rent in order to do so?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this is part of the kind of negative side of the Tenant Fees Act, which in general has been really good for tenants and saved them from some unfair charges. But because of that Tenant Fees Act, landlords can no longer take a higher deposit for pets, obviously higher than the 5-week cap. So generally, if a landlord was maybe taking 4 weeks, they could increase it to 5, but if 5 weeks is their standard deposit, especially if you're going into a property that's been recently refurbished, maybe got some new carpets down, the landlord is not allowed to take any more deposit from you to cover the mint condition new carpets they've just put down if you've got a cat and they think, well, I'm not going to take the cat owner because the cat's going to scratch the carpets. So what they might do instead, which is legal, as long as it's declared, as long as you've got it in writing before you move in, is they might increase the monthly rent by a small amount. Obviously, as a tenant, that's your decision. It's not obviously a fee that you can claim back at the end of the tenancy, but it just covers the landlord for any potential damages that your pet might cause. It's worth having to think about the amount. An extra £100 to £200 a month, far too much. £30 to £50 generally is quite accepted for a 12-month tenancy. So again, just watch your own rights, don't get scammed, but it is normal to expect to pay a little bit more if you've got a pet. So don't feel like you're being ripped off, and it is because we can't take a higher deposit from you. So it's not penalising pet owners, it's just protection for the landlord.
I think it's worth noting as well that us as agents, we I know I certainly do, and I know some other agents do, particularly agents with pets themselves, we do really try to convince our landlords to take pets as well. I think tenants don't think that. I think tenants think, oh no, we're really firm on the point. Now, we have a landlord over the East Way, not an area we really cover, but he's very firm on no animals, absolutely not at all, and there's no change in his mindset. But we've had so many landlords this year who have said no pets they wouldn't consider, and I've got one example actually. I've got a move in today at 2:00 in Preston, and the landlady of there was firm, no pets. I've had a really bad experience with pets, and this particular tenant that moving in, a young couple, and they've got a dog, and they take it into the hospitals as like a therapy dog, and it's a beautiful dog. We told the landlady this, and she was like, oh, okay then. So, us as agents, we are trying to convince landlords. So I think back to your earlier question before, Stephen, of tenants avoiding agents, maybe that's one of the reasons. So just be mindful that we are trying to convince landlords for all the reasons that Pippa just explained. They do generally make good and better tenants. And I think as a tenant yourself, if you are applying for properties through agents or landlords and you do have a pet, and you do make them aware that you have a pet, what I would say is, before you make a decision, speak to my current landlord, and because that tells a lot about how the pet's been. If they've destroyed their property, then fair enough. I wouldn't expect them to let them to you for them to destroy your property. But if you can say, I've got my landlord, I've been there for a year or two with said dog, and they've not caused any damage, then what has the landlord got to lose?
Thank you very much for that, Harrison.
Proof that landlords are people with hearts.
Yeah, most of them, yeah, definitely.
So a couple of other things that came up that we hear a lot from tenants at the moment is evictions during COVID-19, and it's never a nice discussion. And it's confused a number of landlords as well as tenants, I think. And I just kind of wanted to clarify that the notice period for non-fault evictions and some Section 8 evictions are now 6 months notice period, assuming you got your notice after the end of August. If you got it after the end of March, it would have been 3 months. And I think there is a lot of people out there still sending out notices to tenants that aren't compliant with the new COVID legislation.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Harrison?
Yeah, I think the legislation with the coronavirus bill is changing, well, weekly at the moment, and it's even more so since this new tier system has come into place. Now, I think it's a conversation that we can have for probably 3 or 4 hours. But in brief, the national legislation has changed something of 4 or 5 times since March this year. We've gone from, on no fault evictions, we've gone from 2 month to 3 or 4 month to 6 month to a period where we couldn't issue notice at all, and now we're in a situation where, yes, we can serve notice. It is, as Stephen says, 6 months for no fault evictions. Section 8 is pretty much the same unless you've domestic abuse or antisocial behaviour. Then or if you're 6 months in arrears, then the notice period is much shorter of 1 month. But I think what's the further complication now is that courts are massively backlogged, hugely backlogged. I don't think if you served a notice mid-year this year, I don't think you're going to get a court date till next year. So it's a really trying time for landlords, but equally it's also a very trying time for tenants, because they're being told by the council, until you've got a notice or until you're towards the end of the line, we might not be able to rehouse you. We just don't have enough housing. So, I know there's some tenants that desperately want to move. They don't want to be in any further arrears, but they simply have nowhere to go, and they're not going to put themselves on the street. I understand that. I think the issue now, what complicates it even further, is with this new tier system. I read, and again, I haven't fact checked this at all. I haven't read and seen anything in legislation, but I'm told, or I'm led to believe, that in tier 2 and 3 there won't be any evictions allowed at all. I think that relates to the enforcement of it, so I have to double check that. But it's just an example of, even us as agents, we can get a little bit confused, and the legislation's changing so much. But yeah, from a tenant's point of view, you are protected. You have got another layer of protection on you as a tenant at the moment because of the COVID restrictions. But what I would say, and try to make absolutely clear to tenants, is please don't take advantage of that and when you're not in a position of hardship. Those regulations are there to protect you as a tenant and prevent you from being homeless in a situation that the whole world is in now. Don't use that to your advantage when you don't need it. Don't say to landlords, I can't pay rent because of COVID, when in fact you work in Tesco and you've got more hours than ever right now. We had one of our tenants, and she's a lovely tenant, she's a nurse, and she said to me 4 months ago, oh, I don't think I'll be able to pay my rent in a couple of months because of COVID. I'm like, but you're a nurse. Yeah, aren't you busier now than ever? And anyway, she's not stopped paying her rent. But yeah, it is there to protect those that are vulnerable. It does that to a certain extent. It does kick landlords up the backside, let's be honest. But please, my advice would be, don't take advantage of that, because if you're going to say to your landlord or agent, I can't pay my rent because of COVID, the first question we're going to ask is, why? Show to us that you can't afford it. And if you genuinely are struggling, I can guarantee you now that any reasonable landlord and agent will work with you as a tenant and say, right, okay, you are struggling, this is what we can do. The more you bury your head in the sand with it, the worse it's going to get.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of wrap this up by saying that obviously my name was Stephen from IntelliQuick Lettings. Harrison is from Assured Lettings and Estate Agents, and lovely Pippa over here is from Bailey White Lettings. Private Tenants Help and Advice Group is our Facebook group. I believe that what we have here is a very unique collaboration of agents from different parts of the country who have come together to answer your questions as tenants when you have them.
Can I interrupt? I'd also say that we do have a couple more people that aren't on this live video as well that contribute quite a lot and who are involved in the background. So they're just a little bit camera shy.
Yeah, there is one or two other behind the scenes people to prop up our lighting and everything. No, she's brilliant. She couldn't be here today, unfortunately. But you'll see her commenting on your post as well. Thank you, Harrison, for bringing that up. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in to watch. If you're watching on replay, don't post a comment because we won't see it, unfortunately. But do come over to our group. Do come and ask us a question as well.
We're working from home.
We are working from home. I apologise. So I'm going to wrap it up with this. This is for all of my lovely agents here and for all the tenants who have been watching. And we will see you all very soon. Thank you for joining us today.